And one reason why our armed forces is strong is because we leverage and draw strength from our rich diversity within our ranks. Those African American military personnel and Department of Defense civilians who have served our great nation for almost 2.5 centuries. African Americans continue to play a very critical role in protecting our nation. African Americans have stood tall on all battlefields that we have had so far. The first person killed in fighting for the independence of the United States is Crispus Attucks, a Black American who was killed on the 5th of March of 1770. As America's armed forces respect and leverage the different backgrounds, experiences, perspectives, and skills, we will continue to meet our challenges just as we have done in the past. Now, I must give you one example of diversity that I have experienced that really touched me and has stayed with me for about the last 7 years. I have a son who spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. He was deployed to Operation Iraqi Freedom twice. On his second deployment, he was wounded fighting in the cemeteries near Najaf in August of 2004. He was evacuated from Balad Air Base, just north of Baghdad, into Ramstein, Germany, for some time at law school. But my wife and I were in Cairo, Egypt at the time, and we flew from Cairo to Germany. And when I met his medevac plane that Saturday morning, I was able to go on the ramp, go into the aircraft, while those wounded warriors were still on the plane. And as I stood there at the front of the aircraft and looked at those 45 people who were wounded, I saw men, I saw women, I saw African Americans, white Americans, Hispanics, many age groups. Some were very, very young, some were much older, officers as well as enlisted, all services, uniformed personnel, and civilians, all on the same aircraft who'd been wounded or injured in Iraq. And that example to me served as a pillar of an example of diversity, about how diverse we are as a nation. I am sometimes asked who my heroes are, whether it's within African American history, within the military, within the political ranks, or some other area. And the one example I always think of is the Tuskegee Airmen. Now, I'm sure many of you know that the Tuskegee Airmen were a dedicated group of young black men who trained to become America's first military pilots. Between July of 1941 and early 1946, there were about 990 Tuskegee Airmen pilots trained at Tuskegee Airfield in Alabama. About half of that group, about 450, flew missions in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and a few other areas in the European theater of war. Many of these pilots went on to earn high awards. A few earned Silver Stars, about 150 Distinguished Flying Crosses. But the other half of the trained Tuskegee Airmen stayed in the United States, preparing to fight either in the Pacific or the European theater of war. And in early 1945, when they were at Freeman Field, Indiana, 103 of these Tuskegee Airmen pilots went into a white officers club. All were arrested. Ultimately, court-martial charges were preferred against 100 of them for entering a white officers club and refusing to leave when they were ordered to do so by authorities. Well, eventually, charges were dropped for most of them, but 5 of these airmen were eventually court-martialed. Charges were dropped against 4 of the 5, but one of those 103 airmen who went into this officers club and refused to leave was convicted of a court-martial. His name was Lieutenant Bill Terry. Well, I got to meet Lieutenant Bill Terry in 1998 when I was a brigade commander in the 101st Airborne Division. I hosted a brunch in February of 1998 for 5 Tuskegee Airmen, 2 of whom had flown missions in Africa and Sicily, and 3 who did not deploy or at Freeman Field during the training part of their activity. And Lieutenant Terry was one of the 3 who did not deploy. It occurred to me that here I am, an African-American officer in the armed forces, who is hosting a brunch for 5 Tuskegee Airmen in an officers club when one of these 5 had been court-martialed 50-some years earlier for entering and refusing to leave an officers club. And it became apparent to me just how much things had changed in our nation and in our armed forces. My family's history is just one example as to how we have served our nation from the American Civil War all the way to the present. I've talked a lot today about diversity, about how diverse groups come together, and about the 8 ethnic observances that we have throughout the year. But my final point today is that the wars that we fight in as an alliance or as a nation are not won by black soldiers, or white soldiers, or women, or men. They are won by good soldiers, well-trained units that are well-led and that are well-supplied and well cared for. Ultimately, it comes down to being prepared to do what our nation and what the great alliance that brings all of us together here do. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a pleasure today to come spend a few minutes with you and to enjoy a nice meal, even though when I get back I need to spend time on the stationary bike, but I will do that. And I applaud your efforts to have celebrations like this, especially in a NATO environment where when you talk about diversity, you see it vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. And that's what makes our alliance very, very strong, bringing the specialties, the skills, the national work ethics, and competencies together for the good of our world. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for being here today and for inviting me to spend some time with you. Thank you.